Welcome back to the deep dive, everybody. Today we're switching gears a bit. We're gonna dive into something a little more foundational, you could say.
Oh, sounds intriguing. What's on the docket today?
Well, we're gonna be looking at building spelling skills level 1.
Okay, spelling. I have to admit, when I first saw that title, I thought, this is a bit too basic for our deep dives. But then I started flipping through it.
Yeah, it's deceptively simple on the surface,
Yeah.
but when you really dig into how these core literacy skills are taught, it can be really eye-opening.
I agree. It's one of those things we often take for granted as adults. Like, we just know how to spell, right? But there's a whole process, a whole methodology behind teaching those fundamentals.
Exactly. And that's what we're going to unpack today. This resource is designed for first grade students, and it really lays out this structured approach to thinking about how words are actually constructed, moving beyond just memorization.
Right. It's not just about rote learning, drilling those lists over and over. It's about understanding the building blocks, the patterns, the rules that govern how words are put together.
So let's start with the resource itself, building spelling skills, level 1. What's the basic layout? What are we working with here?
So it's a 30-unit book, and each unit is pretty comprehensive. You get these reproducible spelling lists, obviously, but then you also have dictation sentences to practice using those words in context. And then there are 4 different activity pages for each unit, so there's a lot of built-in practice.
4 different activity pages per unit. Wow, that's thorough. Sounds like they really want to make sure kids are getting the words from multiple angles.
Yeah, they're definitely trying to make it as multifaceted as possible. And I think that's one of the things that really drew me to this book as a subject for our deep dive. I really want to understand the methodology behind it. Like, what's the thinking behind choosing these specific words? Why these particular activities?
That's a great point. What's the overarching philosophy for establishing these fundamental skills? We want to give our listeners a clear picture of how they actually build this crucial early knowledge.
Absolutely. And it all starts with those spelling lists. It can't just be random words thrown together, right?
Right. There has to be some kind of logic behind it.
Yeah.
So how do they actually go about selecting the words for each list?
They actually outline several criteria in the introduction. The first one, which makes perfect sense, is that they consider the 200 most commonly used words in the English language.
Makes sense. Start with the words kids are going to encounter and need to use the most.
Exactly. And then they also look at words that are commonly misspelled by first graders.
So they're kind of proactively addressing those areas where kids tend to struggle.
Yeah, exactly. They're not just teaching words, they're anticipating potential pitfalls and addressing those head on.
I like that. So high-frequency words, common misspellings. What else?
They also include words that share common phonetic elements. So words that have the same sounds even if they're spelled differently. This helps kids start to recognize those patterns and relationships between sounds and letters.
Oh, that's smart. So it's not just memorizing individual words, but understanding how sounds are represented in different ways.
Exactly. And then the last criteria they mention is words that change when you add endings, like adding an S to make a word plural.
Right. So they're starting to introduce those basic grammar concepts as well, like how adding an ending changes the meaning or function of a word.
Yeah, it's a subtle way to weave in those grammatical ideas right from the beginning. And it really does make you think about how interconnected all of these language skills are.
Totally. So we've got high-frequency words, common misspellings, words with shared sounds, and words that introduce grammatical changes. Now, something else I noticed is that the number of words on each list isn't consistent throughout the book.
You're right. The early units, like units 1 through 14, they each have 5 spelling words. But then starting with unit 15 and going through unit 30, they bump it up to 8 words per list.
I wonder if that's intentional, like gradually increasing the load as kids' abilities develop.
I think that's a safe bet. As they become more comfortable with the process and start to grasp those patterns, they can handle a slightly larger set of words.
And I also saw mention of these special words on each list. What's the deal with those?
So each list has space for 1, sometimes 2, of these special words. The book doesn't explicitly define them, but it seems like they're either high-frequency sight words, the kind of words you just need to recognize instantly, or they're words that are important but maybe don't fit neatly into the phonetic focus of that week's list.
Oh, interesting. So they're kind of like the outliers, the words that need extra attention because they don't follow the typical rules or patterns.
Yeah, right. Like in list 15, which focuses on long A sounds, the special word is come. Obviously, that doesn't follow the usual long A pattern, but it's such a common word that they want to make sure kids know how to spell it.
Right, so they're not just teaching the rules, they're also highlighting those important exceptions. That's really helpful. Now, you mentioned some examples of these early word lists. Can you walk us through a few just to give our listeners a sense of how they start building this foundation?
Sure. So list one is all about short A sounds. It includes words like an, at, and am, and the special word is just the letter A.
Okay, so really basic short vowel sounds right off the bat.
Yeah. Then list two shifts to short I sounds with words like in, is, it, big, and did.
And then they come back to short A in list 3.
Exactly. List three is can, pan, man, cat, and sat. So they're really isolating these specific short vowel sounds and giving multiple examples to practice each one.
I see they're already building in some review as well.
You got it. List four is a review of both short A and short I, so words like as, had, sit, six, and ran.
Smart. So they're not just introducing new sounds, they're constantly revisiting and solidifying what they've already taught.
Exactly. And then list five introduces short U with words like up, us, run, fun, and the special word to.
Okay, so they're working their way through those basic short vowel sounds.
Yep. List six continues with short U and the special word I, words like pup, bus, butt, and tub.
And again, they're weaving in those high-frequency special words right from the start.
Right. It's all about early exposure to those crucial words alongside the phonetic instruction. So list seven is another review, this time covering short A, I, and U, with words like his, dig, pat, son, and the special word put. Then we move into short O with list eight, not on, dog, got, and the special word the. And list nine introduces short E with words like pet, fed, let, get, and read.
So it's a very systematic, deliberate progression through those short vowel sounds with a lot of built-in review.
Definitely. And as you move further into the book, they start introducing more complex patterns and rules, like list 10 reviews, short O, I, and E, with words like top, stop, men, fix, and fox. List 11 continues reviewing those short vowel sounds and also introduces words ending in N, like 10, hat, hot, sand, and hand. And then list 12 is interesting because it focuses specifically on adding S to make words plural. So words like cats, pigs, beds, bugs, and tops.
Oh, I see. So they're really starting to connect the act of spelling with those grammar concepts we talked about earlier.
Right. They're moving beyond just the sounds of words and starting to think about how words are formed and how their spelling reflects their grammatical function.
I like how they're layering in those different levels of understanding. What about those later lists? Do they get into even more complex spelling patterns?
They do. List 13 focuses on words with double L, like hill, bell, fell, ball, and fall. List 14 introduces words with sh sounds, both at the beginning and the end of words, like she, ship, shell, dish, and wish. And then list 15 is where they really dive into long A sounds with words like make, came, lake, game, shake, ate, tape, and of course that special word come.
So it's a pretty impressive progression, starting with those basic short vowel sounds and then gradually building up to more complex patterns and rules. And they're constantly reviewing and reinforcing what they've taught.
Exactly. It's a very structured and systematic approach, which I think is really beneficial for young learners who are just starting to grasp these concepts.
Okay, so we have a good handle on how the word lists are structured and the reasoning behind their selection. Now let's shift gears and talk about how students actually practice these words. We know each unit has those 4 activity pages. What kinds of exercises are they doing on those pages?
So the activity pages really make up the bulk of the practice. They start on page 24 and go all the way to page 143. Each unit has 4 pages, and they always focus on these 4 areas: read, write, and spell, visual memory and other skills, word meaning, and word study.
Okay, so they're systematically addressing different aspects of spelling with each unit. Let's start with that first one, read, write, and spell. What are students actually doing on those pages?
This is where they really get their first hands-on experience with the words. The book outlines a very specific 4-step process. First, the student traces the word and says each letter aloud as they trace. They even suggest that some kids might need help learning how to do this quietly so they're not disrupting others. Then they copy the word onto a blank line, again saying the letters as they write. The third step is to fold the paper along a dotted line to cover the word they just wrote, and then they try to write it again from memory. And finally, they unfold the paper to check their spelling.
So it's a very multisensory approach, engaging their visual, auditory, and kinesthetic senses.
Exactly. They're seeing the word, hearing it, and feeling the movements of writing it, which really reinforces the learning process.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, what about those visual memory and other skills pages? What's the goal there?
These pages are all about helping students develop that mental picture of the word, really getting them to internalize what it looks like. One of the main activities they mention is using configuration puzzles.
Configuration puzzles. What are those like?
They're basically these puzzles where students have to recognize the overall shape of a word and the relative length of its letters. So they might have to fill in missing boxes to match the unique configuration of each word.
Oh, that's interesting. It's not just about remembering the order of the letters, but also getting a feel for the visual pattern of the word.
Right. And they also incorporate other activities on these pages, like editing misspelled words, finding rhyming words, adding endings to base words, and working with those phonetic elements we talked about earlier.
So the mix of visual memory and applying those phonetic and grammar concepts.
Yeah, they're really trying to tie it all together. And the book actually gives a bunch of examples from different units, which is really helpful to see how they're tailoring the exercises to the specific words and skills being taught.
Can you walk us through a few of those examples?
Sure, for those early short A words like an, at, and am, and a, they have exercises where students have to fill in those missing boxes to recreate the shape of each word.
Oh, that's cool. So they're really getting a feel for how each word looks on the page.
Right. And for the short I, words like in, is, it, big, and did, they have these find the correct word activities where students have to circle the correctly spelled word from a set of similar looking options.
Oh, that's a good way to get them paying close attention to those small details that can make a big difference in spelling.
Exactly. And then as they move on to more complex words like 10, hat, hot, sand, and hand, they might have these find the mistake exercises where they have to identify the misspelled word in a list. And for the double L, words like hill, bell, fell, ball, and fall, they have letter unscramble activities.
So it's a really diverse range of activities, and they're constantly adapting them to the specific challenges of each word list.
Yeah, it's really well thought out. They're not just repeating the same activity over and over. They're really trying to keep it engaging and targeted.
Okay, so we've got read, write, and spell, and visual memory and other skills. What about the word meaning pages? What's the purpose of those?
These pages are all about making sure students actually understand the meaning of the words they're spelling.
Right, because it's one thing to be able to spell a word correctly, but it's another thing entirely to actually know what it means and how to use it in context.
Exactly. So the main way they do this is through fill-in-the-blank sentences. Students have to choose the correct spelling word to complete the sentence, which shows they understand its meaning.
That's a great way to make sure they're not just memorizing the words in isolation, but really thinking about how they function in language.
And some pages also include direct questions that students answer using the spelling words, so they're really getting that practice with using the words in different ways.
Okay, so we've covered read, write, and spell, visual memory, and word meaning. That leaves us with the word study pages. What do those focus on?
These pages really delve into the more analytical side of words, looking at their phonetic structure and how they're built. One of the main activities they do is identifying rhyming words.
That's a great way to further solidify their understanding of sound patterns within words.
Right. And they also have exercises where students have to identify specific sounds within words. Like they might have to categorize words based on whether they contain a particular short vowel sound.
So they're really getting that practice with isolating and recognizing those individual sounds.
Exactly. And then sometimes they'll also work on adding or changing letters to create new words, which is a good introduction to those basic word families and morphology concepts.
Oh, that's smart. So they're not just learning to spell, they're also starting to understand how words can be manipulated and changed.
Right. It's all about building that foundation for deeper word knowledge.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the book also includes these sentences for dictation. How do those fit into the learning process?
So every unit, except for Unit 1, has one or two sentences for dictation. These sentences use the spelling words from that unit in context, which is great for reinforcing their meaning and how they're used in sentences.
It's always good to see words in action, not just isolated on a list.
Absolutely. And they even have suggestions for how to conduct dictation effectively. They suggest saying the sentence in short phrases, repeating each phrase clearly, and having the students repeat it back before they write it down. And then, after the whole sentence is written, you read it aloud again while the students point to each word as you say it.
That makes sense. It's breaking the sentence down into manageable chunks and incorporating a lot of repetition, which is really helpful for young learners.
And it really emphasizes that connection between listening, writing, and spelling. They're not just writing down words, they're actively listening and processing the sounds of those words.
Can you give us a few examples of these dictation sentences?
Sure. For list 2, which had words like in, is, it, big, and did, the dictation sentence is simply, it is big. For list 3, it's a cat sat in a pan.
Okay, so nice and simple age-appropriate sentences.
Right. And then as you move further along, the sentences get a little more complex. Like for list 6, it's I have a pup on the bus. For list 8, it's the dog got on the bus. For list 12, it's the cats and pigs are in their beds. And for list 15, it's come play the game by the lake.
So they're gradually increasing the difficulty as students progress through the book.
Exactly. And they're always making sure the sentences are relevant to the words being taught and interesting for the students.
Now, beyond these structured worksheets and dictation exercises, does the book offer any other suggestions for practicing spelling?
Yes, it definitely encourages practice beyond those formal activities. One suggestion they have is partner practice, where students work together. One student says a word from the list while the other student writes it down. Then they switch roles and do it again.
Oh, that's a great way to get them practicing and helping each other.
Right. It adds that collaborative element to the learning process, and it also helps them practice saying and hearing the words correctly, which is so important for spelling.
So what other ideas do they have?
They also encourage students to actively use their spelling words in their own writing, whether it's just writing sentences or longer stories and reports. And they suggest having students look for their spelling words in other contexts, like on classroom posters, in the books they're reading, even in magazines and newspapers.
So it's about making them more aware of words in their environment and getting them to actively notice those spelling patterns.
Exactly. And they also emphasize the importance of creating a classroom environment that's rich in words. So having word walls and lists displayed, showcasing student writing, and just generally making words a prominent part of the learning space.
It's about creating that immersive language experience.
Right. And their big message is write, write, write. They really stress that frequent writing is crucial for both developing strong language skills and for reinforcing accurate spelling.
It makes sense. The more you use something, the better you get at it.
Absolutely.
Now, the book also mentions these student spelling dictionaries. That sounds interesting. What's the idea behind those?
It's basically a way for students to create their own personalized dictionaries of words that they find challenging or important. They suggest using lined paper and construction paper to make a little book, and then students can add words to it as they go along.
What kind of words do they suggest adding?
Well, any words they frequently misspell in their writing, any special vocabulary words they're learning in other subjects like science or social studies, words for special holidays or events, and just any common words that they keep misspelling even after practicing.
So it's kind of like their own personal cheat sheet of tricky words.
In a way, yes, but it's more than just a cheat sheet. It's really encouraging them to take ownership of their learning and create a resource that they can refer to independently whenever they need help.
I love that. It's fostering that independence and self-reliance. Now, given the title Building Spelling Skills, it's no surprise that the book also outlines some specific spelling strategies for students to use. What kind of strategies do they suggest?
Yeah, they have a whole section on this. And it's all about giving students these simple, actionable steps they can take to become better spellers. One of the most basic strategies is to say a word correctly.
Oh, that's so important. You can't spell a word correctly if you don't know how to say it correctly.
Exactly. They emphasize that link between pronunciation and spelling. And then another strategy is to think about what the word looks like.
So kind of picturing it in your mind and making sure it looks right.
Right. They want them to develop that visual memory we were talking about earlier.
Oh.
And then another strategy is to look for small words in spelling words.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Like recognizing the word at within the word that.
Exactly. It helps them break down those longer words into more manageable chunks. And they also suggest using rhyming words as a memory tool. So if they know how to spell cat, it can help them remember how to spell hat.
That makes sense. Using those familiar patterns to help them with new words.
And then, of course, they talk about learning those basic rules for adding endings, like knowing when to drop a silent E or double a final consonant.
Right. Those are the kind of rules that can really trip kids up if they don't understand them.
And they also point out that sometimes words sound alike but have different spellings and meanings.
Ah, the dreaded homophones.
Yep. And they encourage students to think about the meaning of the word to help them choose the correct spelling. And then finally, they stress the importance of knowing when to use outside help, like referring to a chart, asking a teacher, or using a dictionary.
So it's a mix of phonetic awareness, visual strategies, understanding word meaning and structure, and knowing how to access resources when they need help.
Exactly. It's a really well-rounded set of tools to help them become more confident and independent spellers.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about the word lists, the activity pages, the dictation sentences, the spelling strategies, and those student dictionaries. What about assessment? How does the book address keeping track of how students are progressing?
They include some really practical suggestions for both record keeping and conducting weekly tests. There's a reproducible testing form right in the book, and it usually has lines for 8 spelling words, a space for a special word, lines for 2 dictation sentences using the week's words, and even a section for review words from previous lists.
Oh, that's smart. It's not just testing them on the current week's words, but also making sure they're retaining what they learned earlier.
Right, and they also provide record forms that teachers can use to track each student's progress throughout all 30 units.
So teachers can see at a glance how each student is doing over the course of the year.
Exactly. And if a teacher wants to create their own custom spelling list, maybe to focus on specific skills or to let students choose words based on their own interests, they even provide blank forms for that.
So it's a good balance of structure and flexibility.
Absolutely.
And one last thing I wanted to touch on is parental involvement. How does the book encourage parents to support their child's spelling development?
Well, they have a reproducible letter for parents that encourages them to help their child practice the spelling words at home. It suggests things like reading the words together, having the child write them out, and looking for the words in everyday materials like books and magazines.
That's great. It's about extending that learning beyond the classroom and making it a family affair.
Exactly. That homeschool connection is so important for reinforcing what's being taught in school.
All right, well, I think we've covered just about everything. Looking back at our conversation, what are some of the key takeaways that stand out to you about this resource?
You know, what really strikes me is how intentional and multifaceted their approach is. They're really trying to engage students on multiple levels and give them a deep understanding of how words work. It's not just about memorization, it's about understanding sounds, meanings, visual patterns, and those fundamental grammar concepts.
And they provide so many different ways to practice, which is great for addressing different learning styles and keeping kids engaged.
Absolutely. And I love how they emphasize the importance of practice beyond the worksheets, getting kids writing, noticing words in their environment, and getting families involved.
It's about creating that supportive and engaging learning environment, both at school and at home.
Exactly.
Well, I think this has been a really fascinating deep dive. It's amazing how much thought goes into teaching something as seemingly simple as spelling.
I agree. It's one of those things we often take for granted, but there's a whole science behind it.
And it really makes you appreciate the importance of those early literacy skills and how they lay the foundation for everything else that follows.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So for all of you listening out there, I'll leave you with this thought. How might a strong foundation in spelling, built through these intentional methods, impact not only a child's ability to spell correctly, but also their later reading comprehension, their writing fluency, and their overall confidence in using language? It's something to ponder. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
Until next time.